Welcome to Popternative, where we dive into topical discussions from the worlds of pop culture, social media, and sports. Here is your host, Peter Remoliotis, aka PD Beats.
Hello and welcome to the Popternative Podcast. This is the podcast where we had digital discussions from the worlds of pop culture, social media, sports, everything. Really excited to be joined by an author my guest has written some pretty cool and thorough and pretty interesting books in terms of having discussions, because that's what we want to do. He's written Social Media is Bullshit. He's also recently written Privacy and How We Get It Back. We're with B.J Mendelson. BJ, welcome to Popternative.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
When did you kind of decide that you wanted to write books? I mean, it's one of those things where people know your background. For people that don't know your background, tell us a little bit about yourself. But when did you kind of decide that, you had these perceptions of social media and privacy, and you're like, I got to write these thoughts down and make a book?
Since I was 18, back in high school, I had a website that went viral accidentally. And I realized, there's something here with this internet thing. And, if you don't have money, this is the thing to promote yourself. And a lot of people, they should know that I always wanted to be George Carlin. I want to be a stand-up comedian. And when you're 18 in New York State, because the drinking age is 21, you can't perform in a bar. You are absolutely not allowed in any of the bars. But if you rent out the bar, you can do whatever you want in it. So I figured out real fast, okay, if I book out these bars, I can do my stand-up comedy and to put on shows and whatever. And I had to use the internet to promote it because I was a broke college student. So really early on, I was all over stuff like Friendster and MySpace, ShareYourWorld.com, GeoCities, as ancient as that sounds. All the primordial stuff that we think of pre, Web 2.0 or whatever you want to call it. And so I fell ass backwards into doing consulting for Sears and Ogilvy and Mather and Sprint and other companies about how to make your stuff go viral, but which we can talk about. I have issues with that term. Yep. And from there, I kept following what was happening on the internet. And in 2008, here comes social media and all of these people running around saying how great and wonderful it is. And they were describing it in such a weird way that I was like, wait, are you talking about the stuff I know that works? Or are you talking about something new? And so that's really what pulled me into the first book.
No, absolutely. And we'll talk about that first book now because, I mentioned before we started, a lot of people that studied communications and media studies did, in fact, read Social Media is Bullshit. And it made its rounds there. And it had a lot of success. And a lot of people know about the book. So congrats on that. But what I find interesting is, you definitely play devil's advocate, and you're definitely, people could read the book and say, wow, this guy doesn't like social media as much as I do.
Right.
But what I think you're doing as well is not necessarily being a party pooper, but I think you're just kind of warning people, kind of telling people to relax. You know what I mean? Everyone was kind of excited about social media. Everyone thought that they were quote unquote experts of social media, and there's a lot of things that need to be learned on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think the funny thing is we're talking about this book in 2018, and now when you say social media is bullshit, people laugh and they go, yeah, of course it is. Yeah, like everyone's in on the joke, but you have to keep in mind in 2011 that was not at all the response. So there was people running around saying you can get rich, all your dreams will come true. Twitter will give you a voice equal to that of a CNN. People forget that, but that was a thing that was going on. So I didn't mean at all to dismiss the platforms. In fact, right in the back of the book, it says, I'm not talking about the platforms. I'm talking about the people that are selling this myth and hype around the platforms and kind of perverting what you can and can't do with them in the interest of making a buck.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. You mentioned it a little bit now, but what were kind of some of the motivations that really made you kind of want to write this book? Is there a story that had to do with that as well?
So I test everything. The thing to know about me is in all my books, you can see the end notes are pretty comprehensive. Like the 25% of social media is bullshit is end notes and research and interviews and things like that. So what I did was I took all the social media marketing books that were hot back in 2008, 2009, read through all of them, made notes and said, okay, let's actually test this. Let's see if this stuff works the way that they say that it does. And I had an added bonus. I was on the Twitter suggested user list. So it was 28 celebrities and then me at the very bottom. So people were kind of auto-following me at one point. I had almost 1 million followers. So I said, okay, well, this is perfect. This is the perfect test case. If you have almost 1 million followers, then you should be able to raise money for a not-for-profit, which is what we tried to do for raising breast cancer awareness. And I said, okay, well, let's see. So my ex-wife and I, she was my wife at the time, got into our car. We drove across America promoting the message of early detection of breast cancer. And we were like, okay, let's see if these million followers come out and meet us. And let's see if these million followers come out and make a donation at the very least. If even like 5% of them make a donation, that's fantastic, right? Mm-hmm. So we team up with like Dunkin' Donuts and Sprint, and Dunkin' Donuts and Sprint are actively promoting the tour and saying, come out and meet BJ and Amanda at like the Dunkin' Donuts over by the Verizon Center in Washington, D.C. And no one came out. And so we were like, okay, maybe they're just shy. No one knows who we are. I don't expect them to come out and meet like these two weirdo college students traveling across America. So we go to another tour stop and we're like, all right, let's try to raise some money. Let's see if we can get them to convert in another way. Yep. So do you want to guess how much money we raised?
How much?
$1.
Oh.
A single dollar. And that single dollar was donated by Amanda herself. So
well, I think slacktivism arguments have to get in there as well too, right?
Absolutely. And so I'm gonna let me circle back to that. So when we get back, I'm like, all right. So I made a list and it said either A, I just did it wrong, or B, there's these other things that go on like slacktivism or network effects or participation inequality, which is something we can talk about. Mm-hmm. And these are things that just didn't factor in because I didn't know much about them, or maybe the advice that these guys, and it's mostly men, giving social media advice are wrong. And lucky for me, about a month later, this Marine Corps colonel named Colonel John Folsom calls me up and says, can you do the same kind of tour, but for our organization? I said, sure, but I want to do it a little differently this time. I want to do what I know works. And so we did the tour. They're still doing it to this day. People can find it at highfivetour.com. And it was a huge success. He made over $1 million. He's still doing the tour. And I was like, okay, clearly there's something to be learned here. And it was putting those things together where the book came from. So the book wasn't saying don't use Twitter. The book was saying, we tried this, and then we tried it a different way, and we found that it worked in a way that you might not think it works.
Mm-hmm. But you know what? I'm gonna say something very interesting now that I think I've mentioned before. So I have had the honor and privilege to have written for some fantastic sports hockey publications like Sports Illustrated, and because of that, I did get the blue check mark. And I will tell you though that the blue check mark does make a difference.
Yes, absolutely.
It does. That I will tell you, because a lot of people say like, oh, millions of followers and all that, but if you got the blue check mark, it does. So I'm curious, why do you think the blue check mark matters so much based on from a sociological aspect of things?
Western civilization is based on credentials. Yeah. So you see the blue check mark, you go, all right, someone has said you are legit, and I will talk to you. The other secret to having the blue check mark is that you kind of cut the line in terms of responses. Like people will see your response as opposed to other people on the timeline. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things I talk about is that even though the platform doesn't work the way we think it does in terms of like this mass broadcast tool, it could still be incredibly effective. So for example, if you're like Black Lives Matters, or if you're part of the LGBTQ comic book community on Twitter, like that's still an effective platform to organize a community on it. And then there's other things like if you're reaching out to journalists, because journalists are over-indexed on Twitter. A lot of people don't realize like it's something like 90% of American journalists use Twitter. It's kind of crazy, but that works to your advantage. That means that you can actually reach people through Twitter that you couldn't reach through other means. So there's definitely different ways to exploit these platforms. It's just not what we usually talk about, or at least not what we talked about back when I wrote the book. These days we're a little more strategic. Like these days, a lot of the marketers I poked fun at are basically saying what I said, which is, if you want to use Twitter, use it for one-to-one communication. Use it to cut that line with a blue check marker. Use it to reach people that you can't reach through email. That's perfectly acceptable. There's nothing wrong with that. I just wish they said it 10 years ago. But
I also think that people have, social media in general is growing every day. And I don't think, and I see, the quote-unquote expert. And when I first started the show, it's becoming more like pop culture and promoting up and coming film and news and everything, but we had a kind of, that's why this is close to home for me, these conversations about more like the theories and everything. But we used to have conversations like Chris Yandel, who's with Georgia Tech Athletics, and we were talking about how the term of like expert or guru is a very interesting term, and at one point there was like thousands of social media experts out
Yeah,
there.
it was crazy. There was by B.L. Achman, I think she found there was about 12,000 on them in 2009. And that was just in a quick search. Like she didn't really do that much digging into it. So yeah, at one point they were everywhere. It was kind of like real estate people prior to the bubble popping, is that everyone was getting into real estate because they thought that was the thing to make money. Then the recession comes and all those real estate people went to social media.
And
so
now they're going to go to marijuana.
that's right. They're going into marijuana. They're going into blockchain or crypto. Crypto is
cryptocurrency. The new
Yeah.
for people who are not. Do you watch Silicon Valley?
I do. I love the show.
So they might or might not be touching into the whole cryptocurrency thing, but no, I see your perspective there. So I want to know then, what do you kind of, from the social media aspect of things, what do you endorse? What do you think people are doing right on social media? Because I don't think it's safe to say that everyone's not using social media the wrong way, because there are some people. I mean, my sister and I have an account for our dog, Little Leo the Morkie, and he has 162,000 followers.
Nice.
And I think it has to do with the content, the quality, and the interaction. And it's like a restaurant, right? If the food's not good, people aren't going to come, right?
That's right.
But what do you think, for you specifically, what do you look in terms of trends of social media, what people are doing well, what they can work on?
So it goes back to like the LGBTQ comic book community is a good example of this, where you know that you can reach them on Twitter.
Yep.
Like, that's the place to go to communicate with that audience. And so it makes a ton of sense to have a presence and have a profile and targeting that audience. So that's where I find the value in these platforms. And that's true if you want to reach a younger audience, you might set up something on Instagram. It's really about who you're trying to reach and what you know about them. And I think that's something I touched on in the book, where I said, don't use like Snapchat just because you're using Snapchat. I always tell people the story of NBC, where they had contacted me before the Blind Spot had launched. And they were like, oh, hey, could you do some cool like digital thing to help us promote the Blind Spot? So I went and I found a augmented reality app that we were going to use to do kind of like a cool treasure hunt. And they were like, no, we just want like a Snapchat geo filter. I'm like, why? Well, because the other channels have a Snapchat geo filter. And so there's a lot of that. Like, there's a lot of like, we're using Snapchat for no reason. And so
there's a lot of FOMO too, right?
And so it's understood. It's a very human thing. Like, if you see other people doing it, you will probably do it, because that's the way we're hardwired.
Oh, absolutely.
That's the way we've been hardwired as a species. So I'm not dismissing that or poking fun. I'm just saying that's sort of the thinking that goes into why we use certain platforms. So for me, it's about, is my community there? And if so, what kind of content do they like? And can I provide it in a great way that will introduce them to me? And then I can pull them through the sales funnel that way. So if I can attract your attention with a nice Twitter presence, targeting the LGBTQ comic community, and I can get you to come through to my website and subscribe to a newsletter, that's using social media effectively. It's how I've always tried to position it.
Are you a fan of companies having social media so that they at least have it? Because I honestly think that even though you're not going to use it much, I think companies should have at least a Twitter, at least a Facebook, to have it. I don't know. That's an interesting argument that we can have, but I think it's important just to have them.
I'm very big into SEO because I found it's how long have we been talking about SEO? It's almost 20 years, right? And it still works. And so for that reason alone, I just did this with a crypto company. We're talking about crypto, where I set up a list of like 1,000 places. I said, you need to register all of these. You don't need to use them. You don't need to be active on them, but you do need to squat your brand name, one, for SEO purposes so that Google sees this, but two, also in the event you do blow up, you don't want someone to be a jerk and go onto a site and register your brand name and start posting like crazy things. So some of it's a defensive measure, some of it's a branding measure, some of it's SEO. So I do recommend people do grab the username on any of the platforms just to protect it. But that doesn't at all mean you have to be there. And so if you get, what I talk about in the book is, if you get to be a certain size, it makes a lot of sense to use social media. So like Southwest Airlines is a great example of, you should use social media because you have millions of customers, and not all of those customers are going to call you to complain. They might tweet you. I've tweeted Southwest a couple of times when there's been egregious problems, and not like small problems. So it depends on how big the company is, right? So if you're big enough, you should use social for that purpose alone. But if you're not as big as the Southwest, it's worth registering in domain names just to protect them.
Oh,
Or registering
absolutely.
usernames.
So I understand too that aside from your book on privacy as well, but you've also you're a comic writer. You have a
I
comic
have,
coming out.
yeah, I have two. One is out right now called Vengeance Nevada,
Yep.
which is just a typical superhero comic, and then the one that's coming out in June is a self-help comic book.
Perfect.
And the reason why it's a comic book and not a book is because it wouldn't have stood out from the market. And so it's going back to your question about, how would you use social media? Is there a way to stand out from the crowd and make yourself different from all the products around you? And that's what I did here, where I said, I want to write a self-help book, but I just know there's no way it's going to stand out from the crowd unless I make it into a comic book. And so that's the thing I'm working on right now. The first issue is out next month. It'll be $1.
Very cool. Very cool. And yeah, like I said, the social media craze, I think, is taking a little bit of a break. I think it's
Yeah.
still there, but and I think companies, like, I know you're a big wrestling fan. I'm a big wrestling fan. I know that companies are often, because you see it with the WWE, it's like they're trying new
Yeah.
things all the time. What do you kind of think of these big companies? Because there are people on social media, like, social media sometimes is a wonderful place where people have so many amazing,
Right.
like, opinions on things that might or might not have been sarcastic just now, but no, for example, you could tell they're trying a lot of things, and I'm not a big fan of people criticizing people to try new things. They're gonna try it.
Right.
People
Yeah.
have that if it's not broken, don't fix it mentality, but I see, they did certain graphics and certain things with their video and people just crapped on it, and people, I mean, it's gonna happen because they are a very big company.
Are you
But
talking about the selfie promos?
the selfie promos, but you could tell a lot of their graphics are different. They're
Yeah.
changing it up. And I like them personally, but people on social media don't, right? So my question to you is that because they're a big company? Do you think kind of people just want to, because you know that trolls exist because they don't necessarily don't like you. They like you. They just want your attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's a misconception about trolls, right, BJ?
That's exactly right. Like I mentioned participation inequality. For people who don't know what that means, it's that on any platform on the internet, we found this to be true since 1994. About 1% makes up the majority of the noise and the volume, for better or worse. That could be a good 1%, or that could be a really bad 1%. And the trolls certainly fit into that 1% gap. And then 90% of people sometimes participate, sometimes not, and everyone else just kind of lurks.
Yeah.
So if no one's clicking on your stuff on Twitter, don't worry. People are seeing it. Most people are lurkers. So with trolls, I think that's certainly something to keep in mind. And yeah, I mean, like Roman Reigns is sort of the perfect example of the kids love Roman Reigns, but people on the internet hate Roman Reigns.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids.
I like Roman Reigns.
Okay,
I like him.
don't.
Okay.
But I understand. So my position on Roman Reigns is it's not for me, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I just, it was like with John Cena going back 3 years ago. When he came out, I turned the channel. I got up and made lunch, or I did something else, and when he was gone, I came back to watch Raw. So it's just sort of how I handled it. So I think that's a perfect example of like the internet sometimes thinks it has a bigger influence than it actually might. Because if you're WWE, you're focused on the kids, and you make most of your money through merchandise sales. And Roman Reigns still sells a lot of merchandise to those kids. But if the internet or the trolls are to be believed, everyone hates him. Mm-hmm. And so it creates a skewed perception of reality, which is problematic for companies. So that's why when we talk about companies using social media, I think that's important to point out, is that it's easy for them to be led astray by a vocal minority, for better or worse. And WWE, in their specific case, I think they let that happen. Like they're constantly talking about their YouTube numbers, but 80% of views on YouTube are outside the United States, and most of their shows are in the United States. Yep. So for them to say, all right, well, what the ultimate deletion or the final deletion, or they did so many deletions. The most recent one with Bray Wyatt, that did really well on YouTube. And it was like, okay, but does that mean it's going to play well with the kids? And the answer is, I don't know. You gotta see. But in their quarterly earnings statements, they say, look how great we're doing on YouTube. So that's not a great answer, because really it comes down to it depends on the company, the circumstance, and the audience. And that's sort of the problem with most discussions around marketing in general, is that it really depends on who you are and what your product is, and what it is that you're trying to get out there.
Mm-hmm. I want to shift to a little bit of a discussion with you about podcasts.
Oh, sure.
Because I think that they can make theory classes talking about podcasts the next couple of years because there are so many things about it. First of all, there's so many podcasts out there. And I feel like I'm one to blame because people say, like, how do I get into this stuff? Or how can I get reps and update my resume? And I'll be like, start a podcast, which is like making more competition, which is, I'm sorry for all the podcast community, because there's an amazing podcast community that myself and other people created called Podcast HQ. If you've heard of that, that's actually us. That's me, and we have a few like Pod and Family's part of that, Pod Family, Pod Mafia. But what I find interesting is there are so many podcasts out there that are opinion podcasts where it's guys just talking, shooting the breeze, having their discussions. How many your discussions have to be very good to get the attention based on the amount of things that are out there right now, BJ? I'm just saying there's so many of them.
I mean, that's what I did with so I took the audio edition of the privacy book and I gave it away for free as a podcast.
Yep.
But I knew that if it was just me doing it, no one would listen, because it's sort of like, all right, you wrote a funny book, but I don't know if this book is funny. So I hired a professional narrator. His name is Roger Wayne. He read The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which is 2017's nonfiction bestseller. He did the narration for The End of Privacy is what the podcast is called, and we put it out there. And so I knew that it had to be sharp. It had to be professionally produced. It had to be very high quality. A lot of people don't realize that. Like, a lot of people just like, I'm going to call into Anchor, I'll make a couple jokes, and then that'll be my entire podcast. And I think they don't appreciate how much actual time it takes to make these things and to do them well.
Mm-hmm. And I think it has to do with, for the sports, I mean, it's not necessarily my opinion, but what I'm seeing out there is a lot of people are saying on Twitter, like, they're like, so you're making a I saw this argument on Twitter, and it's actually brought up it was brought up on a podcast, and I found it interesting, where it's like there are so many people talking about their opinions on certain sports and certain athletes, but it's like, and a user might or might not like that podcast if they, depending on what if they have similar opinions to that host.
Sure.
So, for example, the Roman Reigns is the perfect example, right? If there's like a podcast and people are gonna go listen to 4 or 5 episodes of it, but you get those vibes that they like Roman Reigns, then the Roman Reigns people, they don't even have to say I like Roman Reigns, but you could tell podcasters are very attentive and informative, and they're very critical. But it's like my point is, all I'm saying basically is I saw an argument saying that, okay, I have sports opinions, I'm not making a podcast about it, so why are there so many people just like putting their opinions out there?
So that's also like a human nature thing too, right? Mm-hmm. So like real quick, an example of a podcast I listen to that I don't agree with, but I continue to listen to it, is the Masked Man Show with David Shoemaker. I'm a big Shoemaker fan. I was lucky enough to read his book in an advanced copy before it came out a few years back, and I think he's a great writer. I don't agree with David at all. But I listen to the show all the time because it's 2 people, or usually 3, talking professionally about wrestling. So you can certainly disagree with the podcaster and still listen to it. So I think that's worth mentioning. But that said, so again, going back to it being a societal thing, anytime someone tries to get attention for themselves, there's always going to be a large crowd that says, fuck you, who are you? Who do you think you are? Blah, blah, blah. Or I could write a comic book, or I can do it. But those people don't do it. So we don't want, I don't want to put down humanity, right? Like, so I'm trying to be positive because I'm a positive person.
No, I understand that.
But there's this knee-jerk reaction of people saying, well, why are you doing it? Like, what makes you so special? That's a very common thing. We don't like to rock the boat. We're herd animals. And so when someone tries to start the wrong herd, we kind of pick up and react to that.
No, absolutely. But no, it's like I said, these are interesting, stimulating conversations. I think we'll wrap it up. But BJ, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really, really appreciate it. Now it's your time to plug away. Where can people follow you? Talk about the books. Where can they get them? Plug away.
So I don't really use social media. Obviously, I wrote a book. Social media is bullshit. Unless you like professional wrestling and comic books. If you like those 2 things, you can follow me on Twitter at BJ Mendelson. Don't follow me if you don't like that stuff. BJMendelson.com is the place to go. And I always do this in my interviews. I'm giving away Social Media is Bullshit as a PDF. So if anyone wants a free PDF copy, all they have to do is text me, and this is my actual number, 646-331-8255. 8341. The number again is 646-331-8341. And all you got to do is just text me the word sheetrock. So it's spelled exactly as it sounds. Sheet of paper, piece of rock, sheetrock. And I'll send you a free PDF copy of Social Media's Bullshit.
That is awesome. VJ, thank you so much. And we'll have you on again soon if you're interested. Yeah. Well, this has been Popternative. You catch previous episodes, Popternative, youtube.com/Popternative for the video. And the audio could be listened to anywhere you listen to podcasts. We're everywhere. So we're doing really well in that regard. So Spotify, iTunes, everywhere. Till next time, this is BJ Mendelson and Peter Beats signing off.
Thank you for tuning in to Popternative. Make sure to check out our past episodes of Popternative on YouTube. Be sure to like Popternative on Facebook and follow us on Twitter